Hi, everybody. I'm Eddie Aizman, founder and CEO of bowmo. Welcome to another session of the bowmo podcast. I'm joined today by Michael Neece, our Chief Product Officer, and our special guest, John Paul JP, the PEO professional. John, why don't you introduce yourself and give everyone a little background on who you are, what you do.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having us. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, name is John Paul Macedo, and I've been in the HR space for about 8.5 years now, helping and advising companies on anything HR or insurance related. Worked with, been a consultant for Vistage, been a consultant for Compel CEOs, been involved with EO as well, Entrepreneurs Organization, advising companies, and yeah, it's been a great dynamic space.
Fantastic. So as a industry expert, you've been around in the HR space for many years and a long time. What transformations have you seen pre-COVID, post-COVID?
Yeah, definitely a lot has been going on for sure. I think we've seen changes in multiple facets, right? Multi-state and having employees spread across the country has become such a wide phenomenon and reality for so many people, which has caused so many different implications from that on a technology basis to cybersecurity to managing multi-state compliance. So that has certainly been a very large sector that has moved in the direction and caused a lot of increase in demand in technology as well as in HR. That's been one thing. Another thing is what people want, right? I think the pandemic really gave people clarity as to how they want to live, and companies have been not forced, but a lot of companies have been forced to keep up with the trend and to be able to manage, maintain, and keep their employees engaged. I don't know if you guys have seen, Mercer came out with a study at the end of last year as to what people really want from their employers. The desires have totally changed just in 1 year. Between physical and mental health, physical health being number one on the list in 2021, and in 2022, financial well-being and pay became number one. I mean, the list is extravagant, right? But I think one of the two biggest challenges this last few years has been those two things. So managing HR and technology, as well as keeping up with what employees want.
So if you're working from home for a big employer, and employers are required to carry professional liability insurance and have all the coverages, right? The maintaining all that coverages, insurance coverages for everybody. So if you have an employee working from home, and let's say they're on a Zoom call or they're in a meeting and they're doing their job sitting at their desk, but they get up to get a cup of coffee and they slip and fall. Is that considered got hurt on the job? Who is at fault here? Who is supposed to get that coverage?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough question. It's interesting. So with COVID, there's obviously been a little bit of a change in workers' comp codes as well for fully remote employees. And obviously, look, I'm not the workers' comp or claims expert by any means, right? But that goes under the discretion as to what caused the trip and fall, what time was it, were they actively at work, etc. So at that point, an investigation is done and goes from there.
Yeah.
However, based on the scenario that you're discussing, it's probably a legitimate workers' comp claim.
Probably, but to your point, a lot has changed in this post-COVID world, and we'll have to adapt and transform and grow. Have you seen your travel increase? Are you now visiting more with folks on site, or it's all remote?
I think it really is personal preference. A lot of companies are still doing things remote. They don't want to see people on site, especially people in my kind of role, right? Things at Zoom has become so much more efficient and cutting down commute times and things like that. So I think it seems like people are going in person for the things that are necessary and critical, especially for internal operations. and anything else is really going to be done over Zoom.
Yeah. JP, have you seen an uptick in technology transformation? Have you seen folks going from switching or migrating from different HRIS systems or adding different tools and technology to kind of combat this post-COVID environment?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've definitely seen there's a couple of areas that have certainly grown. The recruiting space, as you know, has become particularly challenging, right? I mean, I think this is one of the only times in history where we have more jobs to fill than we do actual people in the workforce. So recruiting has certainly been challenging, and so the technology around all those things have certainly been an increase in demand. The other aspect in terms of technology that's changed has come down to addressing the challenges that come with remote work, right? I mean, the biggest thing with remote work has been isolation, right? And people feeling like there's no community, and that is a challenge with fostering that in a remote workforce, but it can be fostered with intentionality. Tools that foster that kind of collaboration, whether it's Slack, doing intentional things with Microsoft Teams, etc. And there's a lot of technology outside of those two that have been about intentionally fostering and building that community, has definitely been a trend for sure.
As an industry expert, have all the companies that you work with and talk to and engage with on a daily basis, is there one common theme or one common solution that everyone is kind of clamoring for, asking for now?
You know, Eddie, I don't think there's really one solution, because the thing with, and you know this, HR is not a one fits all solution. Not everything fits in the same box, right? And everybody has different challenges, right? I mean, so I can't say there's one particular thing. I can say the only commonality that I've seen is the uncertainty with where the economy's going. So there's certainly reservations in making huge investments going forward, and people are being a little more cost conscious and very careful with their spending. People are looking for alternatives to healthcare, right? That's another thing that's really changed. I mean, inflation has hurt everybody across the board, and cost of living has gone up. But when, gloves go double in price and gauze goes up in price and everything else like that, that also fuels additional claims. And so health insurance and getting more and more creative on that front and keeping the cost low has probably been a big thing as well, for sure.
Post-COVID now is HR is front and center. New world we live in, HR is now front and center of every organization, and we kind of have the spotlight on us. Has that been expanded, or acts has been changed at all to give folks more access to HR?
I can't say there's been a huge change on that. I think the demand really depends on each company, how they're set up, if they have internal HR representation. So has there been an increase in demand? Absolutely, for sure. I mean, if you're managing employees in 10 different states, each state has its own policies, its own ways of doing things, its own regulations around terminations and hiring and what you can ask and what you can't ask. And with that in mind, yes, most PEOs have certainly adapted as giving more advice and better advice in those areas. It definitely ranges widely based on the organization.
Maybe you want to give a little background. Maybe some folks who are listening might not be familiar with what a PEO is.
Sure. So a PEO stands for Professional Employment Organization. So the overall idea is, right, if you think of any company, the typical pattern for growth creates complexity, right? And the enemy of growth typically is complexity, right? In every aspect of the business, not just HR. But particularly in HR, typically what that looks like is it starts off, you're a startup, you typically only just need a payroll company, right? And as you grow and expand and you hire, all of a sudden that goes from being the only vendor you need to now needing 5, 6, 7, 8 different vendors. You need an HRIS system and an insurance broker, a workers' comp broker. You need an HR. You need all these different facets in order to create a proper HR infrastructure and being a good employer. And so it becomes an administrative hassle. You're getting multiple, you're dealing with multiple vendors. So there's multiple profit centers being dished out to different companies. So there's very little cost efficiencies. And so what a PEO does is it brings a single source solution for administration, procurement, and creating absolute compliance around HR. That's like the overall idea.
Great, thank you for that. I'm familiar with the PEO. We've used a few different PEOs now, and they really take away a lot of the burden of having to manage the administrative stuff from all the different vendors. Is recruiting included in the PEO services or source?
It depends on which PEO. Sometimes they are.
They are.
Yeah, there's an internal recruiting team that'll help facilitate and do initial interviews, that kind of stuff.
Come through the pandemic. It feels like things are settling down. What kind of life lessons did you take away from this intense global experience?
I'd say to slow down, right?
Amen.
I think a lot of people did, right? For me personally, I've never had a problem working hard. I've never had a problem being a provider for my family, right? I mean, Mike, just like you said before, you have to learn how to double your income and providing for a family, right? I'm in the same boat, man. My wife stay at home. I get my son's here, right?
Yeah.
And so I never had a problem, working hard. And I think sometimes, I think with the pandemic, it's caused everybody, not just myself, but a lot of people to reevaluate and say, hold up here, what's really, really important and what am I missing out on?
Yeah.
And I'd say probably that's one of the biggest areas, for sure. That and just being attentive, right? Being present wherever you are, right? I think that was another big thing, right? Is being in a position where, if people are at work, if I'm at work, I'm at work and I'm mentally there and I'm mentally doing what I have to do and I'm bringing my all there. And when I'm home and I'm mentally present with my wife, I'm mentally present with my son. And sometimes it's so easy, especially in this remote world, to blend the two together. And so you're never off your phone. You're always responding to emails. You're in two places at once. And when you split yourself in two, there's really no way to have 100% into your own life. What about you, Eddie?
Kind of to stop and appreciate the smaller things, which are really the big things in life, which are your family, your friends, your ability to stop and kind of smell the roses. Something that I spent over 20 years commuting, working in an office in a central location. I was never really home. I was never around when my firstborn was taking his first steps. Stuff like that. I didn't really, I saw it on video, I missed that stuff. But having, just to stop and appreciate the big things in life, which years ago we think were the small things, but family, friends, and just being more present. Those are the precious things in life. And I learned not to take those for granted anymore, to celebrate them every day. Switching a little bit of topic here, going to tools and tech. Since you're on the front line, so to speak, what are some of the challenges you've seen when companies are maybe implementing an HRIS system or adding new tools and technologies?
I'd probably say one of the biggest things would be doing the right due diligence to find the right vendor. I'd say is one of them. And, particularly in the PEO space, there are so many different facets to consider. Because you're basically having multiple parts of the business into one solution. And so you have to look at things at multiple angles, particularly. I'd say the other big thing is people don't talk to the actual service teams, right? Because look, sales reps, the frontline people you're speaking to, most of the times you never see them again. So to make sure that you're speaking with the actual service team, so you get a proper expectation set as to what that relationship is like, I think is a big portion before you make your decision. I'd also say seeing the thoroughness of the technology, both from a employer as well as an employee experience, is very important. And making sure that you're understanding how each vendor is profiting and how they're billing, I think is also important, because those three aspects are what's going to drive your decision, right? And understanding, okay, is this, do I see this strategically making an impact in our business? And if the answer to that is no, the financials don't really make a huge difference. But if the answer is yes, the finances need to align, and you need to understand the transparency and make sure you understand each facet of that. Because every program is totally different with the way they bill, with their annual renewals and what that looks like, with, oh gosh, there are limitations as to what they can and can't do, right? And a lot of times it's not a checklist mentality. It's not like, oh wow, can you do this? Can you write job descriptions? Can you integrate with yada yada program? That's not the right question. It's not, can you do X? Or do you integrate with X? It's, hey, if we had this kind of situation, let's just say where, hey, we had to create 5 different job descriptions. How does that work in your company? And what's the process look like for that? Right. And when people start asking those types of questions, and they ask two or three follow-up questions on that same topic, I think at that point you see there's a glaring difference between each provider. And the difference is how much work and expertise goes into each task, and whether that task is on the client side or whether it's the administrative work behind that task is on the vendor side. Because that in itself creates huge differences in expectation. The other thing I would say as well is not having enough people in the room. And what I mean by that is, like, I'll tell you a story. I had a client 2-3 years ago that came on board. The controller was the only person involved in the conversation for 7 or 8 meetings. And each time I had asked, I said, hey, I know the CEO has not been involved at all in this process. They had no HR person. They were a fast growing company. And so I asked him, I said, hey, I said, can we get the CEO involved in this next meeting? We're going through a lot of information. We've all played telephone, right? And we know how that game ends. And so what ended up happening was they signed on. We had an agreement. We went through onboarding, and then literally 3 months into the relationship, the controller ended up leaving the company. I was re-engaged and working a lot with the CEO. And the CEO kept coming up with these issues and saying, oh, that's not what the controller said, or that's not what the expectation was set up front. And all of a sudden, now he had a different interpretation as to what the offering was like, what the service team would be like, but he wasn't on the call. And so I think after our conversation, we spoke for about 30 minutes. He realized that, okay, maybe these weren't expectations set up front, and the other aspect of it too is because a controller looks things very differently than a CEO, looks differently than a COO, looks differently than a CFO, and looks very different than an HR person. And so when you have one solution that's affecting multiple areas of the companies, right? Because it's affecting operations, finance, in certain aspects, marketing as well, right? Everybody has a different lens looking at that. So when you have more than one person, at least 2 people from different departments looking at it, you come up with different questions and you cover more ground.
Great point.
That's probably one of the other things that I see people miss.
That's a great point. Get people involved to make an informed and the right decision for the company.
What have you guys been seeing in the recruiting space that's maybe been different?
It's been
Uh,
surprising. We talked to a lot of people. Sorry, Eddie.
Sorry.
You know, we talked to a lot of people, and what's been surprising is even with all of the buzz about HR tech and different technologies that people are either embracing or they're afraid of, artificial intelligence, it's still surprising. The old tools are still pervasive. Oh, you know, how do you track activity in recruiting or, you know, employee engagement or something? How do you track it? Oh, I use an Excel spreadsheet. Oh, I use a spreadsheet. Oh, do you have an applicant tracking system? Yeah, we don't like it, and we use a spreadsheet. So that's been a revelation. Eddie, you want to have a?
I think the tried and true way. Sometimes folks ask us, how do you get in touch with candidates? How did you contact that person? How did you get the phone? Simple. We use the phone, and years ago there was a commercial. I think AT&T. Reach out and touch someone. You know, we just pick up the phone and call. And you know, yeah, we do use tools and technology to help us make an informed decision, just like you do, JP, and you advise companies to make an informed decision. We use different tools, technology, make sure we have the right data. We're looking at the right data at the right time, and we just reach out and touch someone, basically.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. So one of the things I've been doing for a while now is if I ever get a referral, if I work with somebody for a while and maybe they don't end up going with, you know, with the solutions that I recommend, or they do, I always write a handwritten note. Because it's amazing how many people never get that, or they just get
Right.
an email instead. And people appreciate that classic touch, right?
To share a story along those lines, I started pre-internet. There was no internet. We used to hand deliver the resumes and put them in a nice folder and write a little nice note about the candidate and hand deliver a folder with the resume to the manager. You know, we're in a great time, I think, coexisting with tools and applications and people doing better, growing. So we have to be able to integrate the old world with the new world and grow from there. So it looks like we're getting to the top of the hour. JP, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing some time and learnings from your experiences in the professional employment organization world.
Thanks for having me.
Any parting message of wisdom, John Paul?
Man, I think this next year is going to be such a defining moment for so many organizations, right? And I mean, look, I think we've seen from the last few recessions, from 2008 to recessions before that, companies can put themselves in such an opportunistic state to absolutely explode and really set themselves up for not just for the next year, but for 5, 10, and 15 years to come, if they position themselves well, if they do a great job at retaining, re-engineering, repositioning, and training their employees to be able to create a company of such exceptionalism that'll fuel them to come. So definitely excited to see what's on the horizon for 2023.
Well said. That's a great parting message.
Couldn't
Thanks so
agree
much.
more. Thank you all for tuning in.